Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts. We're jumping into some Runestrike, and there's been a massive patch. So there's a whole lot of turmoil in the world of Runestrike. Let's jump in. Alright, so the first one on the docket is Aura of Might. Now, this is one that was actually nerfed not too long ago. And it just recently, in this patch, got a buff. What was that buff? Well, its cost was reduced. It's now back down to 3 mana. Now, it still has the conal effect, but the cost is reduced, which is pretty significant. I played a lot of Aura of Might, actually post-nerfs. And honestly, I thought it was still really good. It still was very strong. You can still take over a lot of games by playing this, and your opponent can't immediately remove the minion that it's on. There are certain minions, namely, say, 5-cost ones, because you can't combust them, you can't annihilate them, that all of a sudden, your opponent's going to have a very difficult time dealing with. Granted, there's been a lot of myth aggro running around, and with myth aggro means that you're probably going to encounter Dimensional Rift. So it's entirely possible that you end up with a whole bunch of resources invested into something, and they just go, oops, bounce your guy, and then they set you back 1,000 turns, and you lose. But Aura of Might can absolutely be played on a number of minions, and then just take over the game. You're going to be utilizing your blood abilities anyway, so now you're getting all of this extra benefit for it. It was a card that I didn't really respect, I guess, as much as I should have way back when. But having played with it, you can absolutely do some insane things. The big thing here is the main reason I was concerned about the nerf before, or why I was kind of writing the card off before when it was nerfed to 4 mana. Now you can play it a turn sooner with a thing. So if you want it on a 4-drop, I don't know, Raptor, it now happens on turn 7 instead of turn 8. Or if you set something up, you could play the Raptor on 4, and now you play, say, a 2-drop and Aura, as opposed to nothing and Aura on turn 5. This can drastically change the face of a game, and obviously Emrys is very happy about this, but this is pretty cool. Next up is Brushfire Aspect. So this is a card that I rarely, if ever, see prior. But now it's got a reduced cost. It was previously 2 mana, it's now 1. Now at this mana cost, again, you're saying, hypothetically, you were saying, oh, you reduced the cost by 1. It was already cheap at 2. Who cares? This allows you to sneak it in a lot of turns. Additionally, we've seen the power of Brienne's A2, which admittedly, this only deals 3 instead of 4, but you have to look at it from a breakpoint perspective. And we haven't gotten to it yet, but there have been some aggro minions that have gotten nerfed, which are now in range of Brushfire Aspect. You'd have to look at the whole card pool and have the meta stabilize with those aggressive decks, so that way you know exactly which things this is going to answer or not. But I could certainly see this being a singleton in a given deck, and then you just go, oh, you're playing aggro. You went all in on turns 1, 2, and 3. I'll Brushfire Aspect, clear your board, and stabilize. You could really blow somebody out with an X for 1 with this. At just a 2 for 1, I think it depends. I think if you played it on, your turn 2 to get a 2 for 1, that's pretty good. If you get a 3 for 1 or better, it's obviously great. Clearly, you can set stuff up in certain matchups where, you may not actually kill the thing, but you deal some damage to it, and then you clean it up with, say, a twister on the follow-up turn. I think Brushfire Aspect, and I'm going to repeat this as we go throughout the night, is a cog in the machine. It's one of several changes that are involved that really are putting the screws to aggro. More on that later. But this seems like it's potentially a very valuable effect. Would I run a full complement of these in a deck? Probably not, unless you were really hard-pressed for early sweepers. But it's potentially an early sweeper. That's something to take note of. Burn is getting updated. Burn is now another sweeper in the Chaos Suite. It's getting an added imbue that when you imbue it for 1 mana, it's going to deal 2 instead of 1 to everything. It's retaining the minion to banish ratio, I guess, connection, whatever. And it's going to happen whether you imbue it or not. This is another in the line of things that I feel is problematic for aggro, because now we've already seen 2 out of the 3 cards that are getting updates are now sweepers and early game sweepers. Is 2 damage worth it? I'm not sure. There are some early game 2 mana minions, or 2 health minions, excuse me. 2 mana, 2 health, I guess, is relevant, but point is the 2 health. I still don't care about the banishing. That part doesn't really mean anything to me, and it never did. Now, that being said, the devs have stated that an upcoming season is going to be more void-focused, so maybe it'll get some value there. But it is going to put more of a damper on your aggressive lists. Given that it's a legendary, you can try and squeeze it in. You're only going to be running 1 copy anyway, so maybe. I could see a home for this. I'm still not very excited about it, but maybe. We'll see. Next up is Condemned. This got a reduced mana cost, but this card still seems terrible. I don't even know what to say. I hate to just write stuff off and say, oh yeah, this is, whatever. This is just bad. But this card is just bad. Why would I ever want to play this? I have nothing to say about this. This card is still bad. Okay, so next up is Den of Thieves. Now, this also got a cost reduction. That's kind of going to be an ongoing theme for a lot of the cards. And honestly, at 2 mana, I feel okay about this. It's still not great, but it's okay. Because it's an enchantment, you could hypothetically get extra value out of it, and the primary rogue build that I've seen that has had success is a Zecon build, a Chaos Shadow one, in which you feature Sickle Stalkers, Viking Raiders, etc., namely rogues with Frenzy. Excuse me, rogues with Blitz, not Frenzy. I'm looking at the card and it says Frenzy on it. Granted, Viking Raiders has Frenzy, but I digress. I think this is valuable. I don't think rogues have enough support for them right now, though. I still think rogues are an inferior aggro deck compared to what other options you have, but I kind of want to revisit it. In all honesty. I was just straight up not running Den of Thieves previously. I tried it out. It just felt too clunky. At 2 mana, I think you could probably squeeze it in on some turns and you don't feel awful. Given the nerf to things like Sickle Stalker, being able to do this on 7 instead of 8 with the previous Den of Thieves, maybe that's good enough. I'm not sure, but it's possible. So we'll have to see. Gaia's Blessing is our next change. This is, compared to the other ones, instead of a buff, we're getting, I wouldn't even call this a nerf, it's just a change. And honestly, it's one I like. So previously, it would just give you 3 random runes, which it still does, and then restore equal to their cost. Now it's just going to restore straight up 10 health. Honestly, most of the time that I played this and I wanted it for health to actually heal up, I was shooting for more than 10. We're talking like closer to 20. Because you happen to hit a 9 cost, an 8 cost, and a 10 cost. And it's just like, bang, all right, I'm super healthy. But the times where you hit 1-1-2 felt awful. This is kind of in the middle. I don't know that it's staving off enough damage as it is. It may turn out that a nature-based control deck will still end up wanting this. But at 7 mana, it's very difficult to get an opportunity to actually play this. Because often you're on the back foot trying to recover from aggro, hence why you want the restore. You want the higher cost stuff anyway. Oh, by the way, it's also now nature minions, not even nature runes. I'm checking the patch notes. The patch notes still say nature runes, but this is saying minions in client. So I wonder if that's intended. But we'll go with what the text is here. So assuming it went from runes to minions, you could argue one way or the other whether that's a buff or a nerf. I don't know. I'm not super excited about playing Gaia's Blessing post-change. Whereas before, I probably always considered it, mostly because I personally don't have one with nature. I think you're better off with one with nature. For the most part, it's cheaper. You're going to more likely get something more valuable. But this used to have the upside of, well, hey, sometimes I'm just going to gain 1 billion life and completely change the tempo of the game. That's no longer really an option because 10 is significant, but I don't think it's significant enough. This one feels like a nerf overall. Maybe it'll turn out otherwise, but we'll see. We're back to conal effects, or newly applied conal effects. We have Inspired Arms. This is now target-friendly minion and adjacent minions get +2. This is a nerf that I think was kind of it was inevitable. We had a change a while back to Desperate Charge to give it the same sort of conal nerf as opposed to the whole board. With Inspired Arms laying out there, there's an argument that you could leave it alone. It is in a different order. It doesn't quite give as much of a buff, but it costs less. You know, it's not quite apples to apples, but it's close enough, and I can understand this. If the game is going to be pushing more aggressive strategies, then Inspire and things like it become very dangerous. Now, in this case, it's a difference of 10, if it's your whole board, to now down to 6. Overall, this is obviously a nerf. This is, as mentioned earlier, kind of broken record time, that aggro's kind of getting kneecapped. I am honestly, and I'm going to say this now and I'll repeat it again, I'm a little concerned for aggro. I think there will be an aggro deck, but we swung the pendulum really far into aggro's favor. Specific aggro builds. Not every aggro build was doing well. Because prior to that, aggro was awful. Yes, there were aggro builds, but for the most part, if you wanted to win games, you should not be playing aggro. It was much more difficult to win with aggro than it was mid-range or control. Or combo, as the case may be. Now, then we had a series of patches that swung it. Okay, aggro's in a really strong spot. Arguably too strong. I don't think it was. I think people didn't put in the effort in order to try and combat it. But if we want to change stuff, that's fine. So we're shifting the pendulum back, and I feel like we've swung the other way past center. Not all the way back to where it was, because we do have more aggro tools. We have a lot of buffs. We had new cards, etc. But I think it's a little too far, and we haven't even gotten through all the changes yet. So, chat saying that this shouldn't have been nerfed. I can understand it, and this could be a future-proofing nerf, like I said, where we only see the stuff that's in client, we the players. We see in client, we see what's revealed in patch notes, spoilers, etc. The devs are obviously multiple seasons ahead of us, so they are looking towards the future, and while the here and now matters, it's also trying to make sure that we don't, jump off a cliff when we hit 2 seasons from now because, bang, this other card that they really want to get into play ends up turning into, making this broken. We'll see how it goes. I could have lived without this change, but it's here, so we'll live with it. Speaking of answers to aggro, well, in this case, answers to everything, Marked for Death. So Marked for Death got a redesign and a cost reduction. Now, while this does, again, add another straw on the camel's back, the camel being aggro, Marked for Death getting this kind of change is kind of cool. I talked about it way back when I first started playing Runestrike, like last summer. And one of the things that I try to look for is what's the generic board clear? What's the generic single target removal? What's the generic this? What's the generic that? Because then that tells you a lot about how the devs and how the unwritten rules of the game work. If by a certain turn you need to expect that the board is going to be empty, then that's going to drive the value of a minion that comes out just before and just after. Or how quickly you need to accelerate if you're an aggro deck. Or how much extra defenses or life gain or whatever, removal, as we're talking about now, control decks need to include. Here, Marked for Death at 4 was arguably unplayable. This is actually kind of cool, and I like this. I think this is unique it's obviously unique, but it's impressive in how they could have easily just made this 2, right? But instead, they tweaked it a little bit, added this redesign, and I think this is really cool. I think it takes some of the sting out of playing Marked for Death where, yes, This is clearly going to be better against smaller things. Because you can just, okay, I reduce the attack, I'm basically taking no damage, or I'm literally taking no damage, and then off the thing. Great. But it's still valuable against larger things, and because it takes some of the pain out of it, you can actually make it happen. It's reasonable. So I do like the Mark for Death change overall. It just kind of sucks that it's coming now when we're already kind of really crapping on aggro. But I think this is a pretty cool change, and I definitely want to try this one out. All right, next is Mass Incapacitate. So this got another rework. It's now kind of odd. So it was before it had a conal effect, and it cost 5. Previously, it would give 3, then 2 to the next, and then 1 to the other. So ideally, you hit something in the middle. Now it's setting target enemies attack to 1, and all other enemy minions lose 1 attack. So you basically all but eliminate 1 minion. It also got a cost reduction from 5, which I think I said. Mass Incapacitate was fine. See, I don't think Mass Incapacitate was fine. I think that I like the idea of Mass Incapacitate, this version or the old version. But the problem is that these board lock decks are problematic. There are tons of minions that, you know, they do a war cry or they're just a thing, a body. And then once they're on the board, they just punch. And then this completely turns them off. It's a 4-cost single target removal, effectively, because you can ignore a 1-attack minion. You just don't care. You'll eventually kill it if you have to, or you can just accept the damage and worry about the other lanes. Yes, if you're playing against Hyperia or some other nature deck, I guess they could buff it. There are a number of decks that could buff it, but I don't know. I didn't see a whole lot of Mass Incapacitate before this, honestly. I felt like I was the only person who ever played it. I definitely didn't run into it a lot on ladder. This may cause it to show up more, and I kind of hope that it does just for the sake of getting the card played. But like, the other enemy minions losing an attack is relevant. They just made it worse. I don't know that this is worse. I don't know that this is worse, because realistically, I don't think you ever got... Like, when I played Mass Incapacitate, I very rarely hit more than one thing. And when I say hit more than one thing, I mean hit something with 3 and then hit something else with 2. It's very hard for that scenario to happen. So it's not significantly different, but this is now better against larger things than the old Mass Incapacitate, whereas the old Mass Incapacitate wanted to hit smaller things, because -3 and -2 was much more relevant against aggro than it is against Demonic Overlord. You know, that sort of thing. Here, this wants to hit that Demonic Overlord, and you don't care if they have other stuff, because the -1 is relevant, but not that relevant. I don't know. This is different. I am leaning towards this is slightly worse, but not significantly so, because it's obviously much better at what it's trying to do compared to the old version trying to do what this version is. That's a very weird way to describe it, but I hope people are following me. But I don't know if it's better at its job than the old Mass Incapacitate was at the old Mass Incapacitate's job. It's a very strange way to try and look at it, but I hope people are understanding what I'm trying to get across. I'm okay with this, I guess. Continuing on with the order cards, we have Order of the Aegis. So this was another enchantment that happened to get a buff. In this case, reduced mana cost. We're keeping the same effect, but similar to Den of Thieves, we're just reducing the cost from 3 to 2. I didn't really like Order of the Aegis before. I saw it occasionally, you know, some fringe play. Because it's a legendary, you can't rely on the effect, and that's also a problem with Den of Thieves, is that the legendaries just don't happen enough in the decks that these ones are going to be showing up in. You know, for going back to Den of Thieves for a moment, I don't know, how are you finding Den of Thieves consistently? And similarly, Order of the Aegis, and I guess now that you have the new Light Tutor, you could somehow play Light Rogues or play Faith with this and then go tutor it out, but Faith doesn't even have a 2-cost blood ability. I don't know. This doesn't... They're pushing it... It's weird because you need to play something that your opponent wants to play in front. So Den of Thieves wants your opponent to play in front of it so you can keep punching it and get the effect. Your opponent's obviously going to play off lane because they don't want to do that unless you have to. But you could just kill them. Here, it's a similar thing where you want your opponent to contest that spot, but they just probably won't. So I guess you play protect minions or something to try and soak hits because of the shield. I don't know. Given how cheap this is, I could see trying to slot it in a deck, and then if it comes together, great. The problem is, to me, including these one-offs, it poses problems because you end up where you're going to see it in games that it doesn't matter, and I can't think of a matchup where this breaks it open. So you're going to see it in those games where you just play it and it does nothing. As opposed to a game where, oh, I slam Order of the Aegis and this just completely takes over the matchup. I don't know what that matchup is. Okay, so next up is Plague Swarm. Another card that is going to make aggro cry. So whereas before it was -1/-1, now you have an imbue where you can play it for 4 and they get -2/-2. Is this going to cause Plague Swarm to see a lot of play? I'm not sure. Previously, I saw it way back when. You know, when I first started playing kind of thing. Since then, I rarely, if ever, see it, and I'm usually blown away, but not blown out when my opponent plays it. At -2/-2, this is significant, but on turn 4, I don't know that that's good enough. In conjunction with blood abilities, it's possible, but most of them, say you're playing Morlich, or you're playing Zekon, or you're playing, you know, you're already killing things with your blood abilities. You're not playing this in Ogma, and then in conjunction with Ogma's A2 and playing this, you kill something, because obviously you're just not playing this in Ogma. So it makes it a challenge in order to make some of this stuff happen. I'm torn on this one. I do appreciate that they're going back and updating these old cards because they absolutely needed it, and I think Imbue is a good way to try and buff these things. But at 4 mana, I don't know if this is good enough. I can't think of a Shadow deck that was looking for this. But again, this is another card in the pile of, okay, well, we're kicking aggro while it's down. Speaking of buffs that I'm not a huge fan of, let's talk about Righteous Wrath. I thought this card was fine. I think it was just strictly underplayed. People didn't appreciate the value Righteous Wrath could present either as removal or just aiming it at face. Which, by the way, does this put the final nail in Faith's coffin? Because if there's another playable light deck, you're just gonna kill her. Because it's like, oh, it's turn 6, take 14. Oh, you got a really strong opener with conditionings and maybe Bylight's Grace, you spam day 1, Righteous Wrath to the face. Oh, look, you're dead. Like, it's funny. Is that realistically going to happen? Yes, it's going to happen. Like, that's Faith. I've beaten Faith because of Righteous Wrath, and I think Righteous Wrath will probably see a lot more play now. I think this card was fine at 4. It's just really strong. Now, I do want to put out there, I saw a bunch of people complaining about the comparison to Pillar of Flame. And similar to some of the other cards that we talked about earlier, namely like Inspire to Desperate Charge, etc., it's okay for there to be a better version of a card in a different realm. That's both okay and sometimes very good, because the realms typically should be better at different things than one another. Now, when you get to huge extremes, that's a problem. And personally, I would love if everything was roughly even, but everybody could do everything, so that way everything is unique. But we have to talk about realistic card game constraints. And you're going to have to set boundaries as the developers as to which things are good at what. Apparently, light is better than chaos as far as Pillar Flame goes to Righteous Wrath. Now, I don't really see that as a problem. I don't know why anybody really cares. It's not as though chaos is hurting for single target removal, let's be real. On top of it, it's nice to have something in light that it can actually, kill something without having to put in 4 or 5 cards to make something happen because, oh no, Bright Song won't actually get that guy, or Cling to Life will get that guy, but I can't get that. It's like you have to jump through 15 hoops. Righteous Wrath says, yeah, just go kill that thing. I'm done with it. And I think that's fine. I don't know that this buff needed to happen. I think it was fine before and people just needed to recognize it. But that has been a approach in a number of other games where sometimes the player base needs a nudge. The developers have to kind of do a little bit more than breadcrumbs to encourage people to try certain things. So I expect more Righteous Wrath. Put it that way. Another buff, and that's Sever the Source. So it just got a cost reduction, and it basically, well, it's now a pseudo Incinerate. This is another one where I just don't think it needed to happen. And similar to basically nearly every change we've seen so far, this craps on aggro. This gives another tool that comes out faster to deal with more things. I'm not real clear on why this one happened, to be honest. I'm not really sure. Again, I think that aggro now has, because we're looking at, let's go back to the top of the list. Or of Might, it kind of influences aggro, but not really. But we have Brushfire Aspect, Burn. Condemn, nobody cares about. Den doesn't apply. Gaia's Blessing kind of fits aggro. It's slight buff to aggro, we'll say. But Inspire, Nerf, Mark for Death, Plague Swarm, Righteous Wrath, Sever the Source now, and we're not done yet. There's more. Point is that now it's just another single target removal that gives you an added benefit. Sever the Source was certainly playable before, so I don't see this going anywhere now. Sever is really strong. After that, we have an update to Soul Spear. It's now dealing 6 damage. I think it used to deal 5. It used to deal 5. I don't know if this requires an opposing minion, because I've literally never played this card. I think I've seen it played against me. I could probably count it on my hands. This is the sort of card that feels as though it exists to enable combo. But I don't care about this card at all. You're inherently 2-for-1ing yourself to kill something, so that means that you need to be getting a benefit, aka a berry, out of the card that you're sacrificing. Which means that it's going to lean into, when this card is good, it's probably doing something that it was never intended to do. So I don't like Soul Spear, but it's improved now. Have fun, I guess. After Soul Spear, we have Umbral Vise, which actually only released not this past season, but the one before, right? It's a pretty quick update to this one. So this is lowering the imbue cost. So I think it was 2 blood before. Yeah, it was 2 blood. Now it's a single blood. And again, so this one I liked before. I thought Umbral Vise was in a pretty good spot before. Now it's, again, we just counted it up when we were talking about Sever the Source, but add another one on the pile where, okay, good luck, aggro. Make sure you're spreading out all your minions. Unless you have a very good reason, there are a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but there are now more conal effects to punish you. I've played Umbral Vise before. I actually really like it. I think this card is really strong, and I think people aren't paying attention to it. Now, the problem is, and we're getting to the rest of it, where it's going to explain part of why this is a lot better. But the biggest issue is that nearly every early game minion dies to this. So it is what it is. At worst, you're probably 1-for-1ing something. So I anticipate Umbral Vise, at least as one of, it adds redundancy to sweepers out of Shadow. So that way you can try and make something happen. Like you can ensure, oh, well, if it's not specifically Umbral Vise, it's something else. And then we find it. So Wither got a cost reduction. This is another card that I can't begin to care about. The ones where you have to, your opponent has to cooperate like this, don't care. When we first were learning about the Divine mechanic, and I thought it was controlled by you, as in the player playing the Wither, I was thinking very highly of these things. Not so much now. I don't care about Wither here. Your opponent is once again going to just ignore it until it doesn't matter. So now we're on to minions, and we're getting towards, you'll understand more about why I'm, aside from the fact that we're just getting updated removal, but more stuff that is hurting aggro. Crazed Alchemist. This isn't the one that I'm referring to, but Crazed Alchemist got a mana cost reduction, so it retains its body, still the same effect. I might revisit it, Alchemist. I've only recently begun cutting it from decks, because it still represented a potential large draw effect. And the body wasn't horrendous. It's still kind of costly. It's a 3/5 that probably says draw 2, which isn't bad. I could certainly see this showing up again. I think I kind of expect people to play it again. I kind of feel like this should be 3 and just change the body around. At 2, it was too good. But at 4, it might still be a little too clunky. After the Alchemist, we have Crescent Guard, who is relevant for 2 reasons. We'll talk about the second one later. But this got a larger body. It's now a 4/8. It was, what was it before? A 4/6. So it got 2 extra health, which is relevant. It is a guard minion. I still don't think I'm ever playing this. Right now, we don't have anything that cares about warriors. As in, I guess Tauric War Leader, but, there really aren't that many things that say, hey, play a deck full of warriors. You could, of course. But Crescent Guard is more relevant for a different update that we'll talk about later on. I think that this is fine. Again, I probably wouldn't play this on its own. I'm sure people will, because just as the Dragon Sentinel got buffed, a lot of people were trying it. I mean, this is better because it's on the ground, so it'll interact with things, whereas the dragon just gets punched. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add, but I think this is really just the Brienne change. This is really just that. So we'll talk more about it when we get there. So speaking of aggro nerfs, we have a nerf to Fallen Fairy. It was a 3/2. It's now a 3/1. I don't care about this change, but for different reasons. Mostly, this thing was dying to just about anything your opponent was playing anyway. Now, here's one reason that you might care about it. Burn is likely to get played more, and so is Plague Swarm. Both of which will now kill this without investing in the imbue. So that card that Fallen Fairy would have survived now actually gets her, which is unfortunate. However, it's probably reasonable that she does die to those things in the early game sweepers, because you go turn 1 Fallen Fairy, turn 2 other fairy, turn 3 a different fairy. Your opponent plays some kind of removal. And it's reasonable to expect that your 1-drop dies. So this is fine, and for the most part, I'm saying I don't care because, yes, it's a nerf, but realistically, it's going to matter about the breakpoint. So if we see a ton more Plague Swarms or a ton more burns or something like that, yes, it matters. But, again, it should matter. Like, this is fair, I think. Okay, so here we go, chat. This is where things really start to go downhill. We already had one nerf to Fae. we now have another nerf where this is really to myth aggro in general, and that's Giant Scarab. I mentioned before that I could see it going to a 3-4, but going to a 3-3, even though it replaces itself, is now meaning that it's in range of a lot of things that are going to be seeing more play. Brushfire Aspect just got a buff. That deals 3 damage. Sever the Source got a buff. That happens to deal 3 damage. Righteous Wrath got a buff, which will now kill this because it has attack and health that are equal. There are a number of things. Umbral Vise got a buff. That may just get played more, and it's now going to kill it. I'm not a huge fan of this one, but I kind of get it. It just feels like it's overboard in conjunction with the other buffs. So we got a ton of removal buffs, and then we got a bunch of aggro nerfs simultaneously. So it's not just bringing something down to the level or bringing other stuff up to the level. It's swapping them. And that's the thing. Harvest Souls kills it. Well, yeah, if it was 4, Harvest Souls would have got it also. But yes. As a 3-5, it was probably too sturdy, and I think we all saw that. As a 3-4, I think that was fine, because putting it at 3-4, and I mentioned this on previous streams, if you play a 2-attack minion in front of it, it'll now kill it in 2 attacks instead of 3. Now, realistically, the Giant Scarab player can probably remove the 2-attack minion, or deal with it in some way. But it at least brought it into range where a card or an attack plus a card will deal with it. Now this thing just croaks out of hand, kind of thing. But it still takes 2 attacks for the a 2-attack minion to kill it. I don't know. This one's kind of weird. Like I said, I think what's influencing my decision about this, or influencing my opinion about it, is just the fact that you have now a whole bunch of removal buffs and nerfs here. It's unfortunate. Any of these probably would be fine in the abstract, or even in conjunction with each other, just maybe not so many. I think that's what's getting me at the moment. But we're going to live with it. It is what it is. Next up is Guardian of the Brood. So this got nerfed. It was a 7-7. It's now a 6-6. Honestly, that's probably fair. It's probably fair. Did it really need to be a 7-7? Probably not. Are you still going to play it? Probably. I don't really see a problem with Guardian of the Brood getting a slightly smaller body. Notably, since Righteous Wrath will probably go up in value, or should be going up in value in people's minds, this is less likely to survive, because now there's yet another thing that will be in decks that will remove it cleanly. You still get your Broodmother, though, but it is going to be an enormous tempo loss, where they pay 3 to, you take your entire turn to play Guardian, they Righteous Wrath, play a threat, or do other thing. That could be a problem. But Guardian of the Brood, I think this is still going to be fine. Just kind of sucks that my preview card got nerfed. What are you going to do? Standard Bearer, also nerfed. This now has a higher mana cost. Didn't this have, was it 1 blood before? No, it's always been 2 blood. This is reasonable. I think board fills are similarly very dangerous to board clears and a number of other effects. You still have to be concerned about it. I think this will probably still get played. I could see maybe going back to a single copy depending on the deck, just because it's going to, and in conjunction with another champion change that we're going to talk about, it can make it difficult to squeeze things in on turns that you want them to happen. But the effect is powerful enough that it warrants probably considering it regardless. I think Standard Bearer is likely still going to appear, but clearly a little bit less. This is warranted, I think, overall. All right, so Swamp Scout, highest priority on the list, had to be nerfed. Did it though? Did it though? I meant to check this before the stream, but how many legendary beasts are there? There's not Sobek. There's Unicorn. There's Nemean Lion. And there's Iron Bull. So if you've ever been on the opposite end of a Nemean Lion off of a Swamp Scout in something that should not have been able to play it, you're probably okay with this change. You're probably okay with this change. It's also potentially an enormous amount of value out of a 2-drop. Yeah, you don't get 2 Iron Bowl. If you're playing this in Emrys, you don't get 2 Nemean Lions. If you're playing it in not Emrys, you don't get Nemean Lion to begin with. I think I'm okay with this. It's fine. Does it make it better in a way? Now the pool is smaller. That's really going to depend, because we were talking like 4 cards. The pool is smaller, but we're not talking about it's 1, 2, it's 3 cards compared to a lot. Like, yes, the pool is smaller, but we're not talking enormously so. Now, some of these are like this, where it mentions the word beast, so it's coming up, but it's not a beast. It's not that big a deal. Really, when I'm playing Swamp Scout, I want it to draw me a card. And since it's Conjuring, I get to choose it. The fact that now my options aren't going to high roll as high, okay, I'm still going to play this in the decks that are playing it. And it removes some of the feel-bad scenarios. I personally, and I talked about this way back when in my Conjure video, that the problem kind of solves itself just as you introduce more beasts. Now, it may be that they don't plan on introducing a lot of beasts. I don't know if we can infer that for the next few seasons. That maybe if the issue right now is, yeah, getting a Nemean Lion or getting an Iron Bull is just happening too frequently, whatever that number is. So let's add more beasts to dilute it, but we can't because we already have these seasons mapped out. So the alternative is nerf Swamp Scout, possibly. And I have no reason to suspect that is the case, but maybe it is. You won't be able to hit certain things with this, and that's fine. It's okay. One thing I want to point out is there are only 2 gods in Runestrike that are multi-tribed. Tiamat is one of them. The other is Mir, and they're both dragon gods. None of the other all the other gods are tagged god, but not another type, which is interesting. But that's not the change that was happening here. So the change that is happening here is you can now target where the Hatchling Drake lands. This is interesting for a few different reasons. Honestly, I don't think I'm playing Tiamat anyway. The only time it really shows up is when I get it off of Freya or something along those lines. And I don't know, but I'm sure there's a way off that I can't think of to generate it on your opponent's turn. The reason I bring that up is I don't know what happens if you Warcry this into play, or you sneak it into play on your opponent's turn. How does the Warcry work if it's on your opponent's turn? Because to my knowledge, I don't think that there's any other card that allows you to target something on your opponent's turn. It's one of the arguments for why Hercules has to be worded the way he is. Because if it randomly pops out, it randomly kills something. There's no player interaction there. On your opponent's turn, we're talking about. That's why a lot of cards are templated to either be random or the opposing thing or, you know, the highest health, lowest attack, whatever. This specifically lets you target, which is interesting. Is it really going to matter from an actual playability standpoint? I doubt it. I think I've activated a Hatchling Drake 2 or 3 times. There are occasions where things trigger on opponent's turn. I've seen it before. Well, the triggers, yes, but the targeting is the thing. So there are, yeah, cards. So there are ones, like say you got back Swamp Scout, since we were just talking about that, and it's the same sort of thing. It may not target a lane, but the player who has that card now has to make a decision point. So I'm assuming the game will just let you do it. But I'm not sure how often that happens. I don't recall a scenario where it happens, but like I said, I assume the game will just switch priority back to your opponent and let you do something. As far as Tiamat goes, I don't think this matters. I'm still not playing it in any of the dragon decks that I'm playing because there isn't room. If I get it, I don't even know that I'll take it. I mean, spawning the extra Drake can matter if you had an existing Drake, because now it's, okay, well, it gets +2/+2. The summoning is definitely better, because now you can forcibly put it in a lane of your choosing, hence target, right? I just don't know if it's really going to matter too much. Okay, so we're closing out the card changes with Whispering Imp. This is what I really don't like. Whispering Imp was one of my favorite cards once it got buffed. I don't know that this card is playable now outside of combo, because it is a 1-cost draw card in combo, if there's a combo that exists and wants Whispering Imp. But I really liked this card before. It definitely felt too powerful. Now, I guess the way I would have tackled it, you can't modify the health, similar to how we were talking about Fallen Fairy, and sure, she has -1 health, but who cares? That means nothing. You can't make it a 2/1, because who cares? It's a 2/1 flyer for 1 that draws you a card. All the important things are in the top left, the bottom left, and the text box. You don't care about the bottom right number. As long as it's not 0, it doesn't matter. So it would have to have a rework of the text. And to me, I would want to put some kind of drawback on it, is how I would do it. Either it's draw and then discard a rune, or it's draw and then discard a random rune. I would certainly not want that, but, you know, that's an option. Draw a rune, take a bunch of damage. Put a requirement on it that you must have X number of Fae in your hand and or deck in order to make the Warcry activate, or something like that. There are a number of ways, and infinite other ones, that you could come up with to make this different, but still keep it as a 2-power flyer that draws you a card for 1. And I think that, as it is now, I expect I'm not going to see a lot of Whispering Imp. I don't know. Maybe it'll turn out otherwise, but I'm not super optimistic about this. First up, hero changes. Dawn, A3, back down to 5 from 6. Dawn's in a weird spot. She had all of those nerfs and then further nerfs, and now they're reverting some of them. It's weird. She definitely took an extra hit because of the Bylight's Grace nerf, and it sounds like, just from general observation, that blood generation is maybe a concern. Dawn basically dropped off the face of the earth. I don't remember the last time I saw her. I do want to give this a try and see if we can make something work. It's clearly going to be slower than the existing aggro, even post-nerfs. But since it's sturdier, maybe it stands up better to the removal that is getting buffed across the board, for the most part. It's possible. The big problem I see with Dawn is she's very much, I'm an A3 deck, but it's not an I'm an A3 deck that could do other things. So take old Brienne, who we're going to talk about in a minute. She was basically an A3 deck, but you could A1 or A2 if you wanted to. And you could even do those in the same game. It felt, in a lot of cases, and I know this isn't 100% true, but it feels like Dawn just wants to A3 a lot. You don't want to ever do the other things. There were decks with old Ra leveraging Twilight's Embrace. I don't think I've seen anybody attempt something like that lately. And Seal Life occasionally comes into play. You know, you'll break a race because you're draining and they're not. It feels weird. It feels like she's much more all in on her A3 than other champions. Maybe that's not really true and I just haven't played her in a while. I definitely want to give her another try. I'm leery about her A3 getting buffed at all, and honestly, I would rather see some things get reworked on her and then kind of go from there. We'll have to see. Next up is Sakara. This is the one that everybody was waiting for. A1 finally got nerfed. So way back we had Soul Amulet nerfs, and then for some reason everybody, I guess, forgot about A1, and then it has recently been rediscovered, much to the chagrin of the general community. And Sakara, or A1, now has been changed. I mean, it's a nerf because it's not Blitz, which is the most powerful keyword in the game, but it's a rework. So now its target minion loses all power for 1 turn. It's been reported in Discord that this also prevents any buffs. So say a Gigantify, Hyperia A2, or whatever. You try and play that on there, gets nothing. I'm curious because I didn't see whether this was reported. Say someone does that, do they gain the buff afterwards? So you A1 them, they play the Gigantify because they wanted the +3 health also, let's say. Does that +3 come back? I would assume it does, but I don't know if that's actually true. You can confirm that it does get it afterwards? Okay, cool. Thank you, Doc. Your opponent could still try and play around it by doing things like with Gigantify. Obviously, only front-end buffs are going to be worse against this, but if you need to play it as the non-Sakara player, you need to play it this turn in order to ensure that you're matching tempo or whatever, because next turn you need to do this other stuff. It's good to keep in mind that you can still do that, even if you miss out on 1 turn of buff. Still, I think this is pretty cool and kind of leans Sakara into her A3 more, which, honestly, I expect this is going to be one of the next things that people are going to complain about. People are going to complain about this because it is way more consistent now. The big issue I had with A3, and I know we really should be talking about A1 because that was what was changed, but look, Blitz is gone. Ding dong, the Blitz is dead. That's it. So now the focus shifts to A3, I think, and I expect a lot of people are going to complain about it. It's another thing that is going to beat up on aggro. It is an early board clear. And you can probably A1 and A3 a few times in a game. Are you going to be running Nile Princess to generate extra blood? Probably not, but you could. It is possible. You could certainly run Prince of Rags. Like, that's not unreasonable. I think Sakara is still going to be fine. It's just the deck is going to be very different from what it was before, clearly. You're not just blitzing Void Golems, which, by the way, that thing goes right back into the binder, right? I guess it can just be a big dummy who punches good, but we have a lot of those. And if you want a big dummy, you have a plethora of big dummies. I guess one of the things Blitz Golem, which I guess it was, Void Golem has going for it is that you can just play it and then do other stuff on the same turn. So it can be your big late game threat without taking up your entire turn to play it. It's a 10-drop stat-wise that doesn't cost you 10 mana. It's something to consider. Overall, I'm positive about the Sakara change, because this was a thing that I think is absolutely necessary. I don't think Blitz should be on blood abilities. There are certain things that shouldn't be. Now, I always say that, but then follow with this caveat. Unless Blitz can't be on blood abilities unless the developers really want it there. Obviously, if they want something to happen, they're going to make it happen in their game. But they need to be ready to adapt to what that causes. So to me, one of the biggest issues with Sakara's A1 was that it should prevent any neutral myth or order minions ever being good if they are blitzed. So everything needs to be overcosted. Every single minion that does not have Veil needs to cost minimum 1 or 2 mana more. And basically none of them can have attack again or any reasonable frenzy, because you'll just blitz it and eat their whatever dude's available to make the trigger happen. You have to always go, well, what happens if Sakara has 3 blood and I play this? That's no longer the case. And you can design the game with that being in, I mean, it was in for this long, but if they kept it, you can keep it around. But the problem is, that's going to skew a lot of the development, and eventually somebody's going to slip and we run into a problem where, Sakara craps all over everything again. Or maybe they're on top of it all the time and it's just never an issue. It's possible, but I think it overall just makes the devs' lives way more complex than they need to be. So, good thing we're changing Sakara. All right, now we're talking about Hyperia. And talking about Hyperia means we're talking about Tribal Wisdom. So this got an increased blood cost and now costs 4. And I'll be honest, I don't think this was necessary. I think Hyperia was very good. I think a lot of people felt Hyperia was very good. And a lot of people wanted Hyperia nerfed. I was not one of those people. Especially in light of the new changes that we're getting for single target removal. Even the new Mass Incapacitate kind of craps on. It's like, oh, I'll set up a board and Tribal Wisdom this guy. All right, Mass Incapacitate as a 1 attack. Go. Now, at 3 blood, it can come up again relatively quickly. At 4 blood, clearly an extra turn is needed, and it's just a larger investment. I don't think Hyperia needed this, but as a whole, I've been on record on many occasions saying that you could increase the cost on 100% of the blood abilities, even ones like Amazonian Guard, and we'd be fine. And the game would arguably be in a better place. So I'm fine with increasing this. It's just within the context of other things going on, I don't know that this feels absolutely necessary at the moment. Still, I assume this will calm the hordes for a little bit, since everybody was so rabid about Tribal Wisdom being super strong. Probably not. Probably not. Okay, so last thing for this patch, and then we'll do overall thoughts. The last one for this patch is Hero of the Highlands. As mentioned with Sakara, Blitz should not be on blood abilities, but I guess they took it to heart. This got a complete rework. Instead of Blitz +2/+2 and Warrior Conjuring, it does something completely different. It feels more flavorful, and I think we're better off with this the way it is. I don't know that it's worth 5 blood, but that's mostly because I haven't played with it, and it's tough to evaluate. But Hero of the Highlands now summons a Crescent Guard, which we talked about earlier, to target slot. It is protected until successfully attacked. So you can still target it, but it's protected, so you can't burn it down. It costs 5, so it's going to dodge those combusts and annihilates. This is very interesting. I like the rework because it's very unique. I think this is a very creative way to address it. The protected until successfully attacked is kind of weird. I sort of still expect this thing to just die. But that probably, given that it's now a 4/8, that probably necessitates that your opponent had 3 things uncontested on the board, which, if that's the case, yeah, they should probably be able to kill it. That seems reasonable. This is, I don't know, I like this. I'm excited to try it out. Does it change Brienne's decks? I'm not sure, because a lot of them probably function in a similar capacity. You just don't have this inevitability that you did against other slower decks, mid-range control decks, where they are on a clock. They need to achieve a certain board state and close the game before you just Hero of the Highlands 4 times, because that might be good enough to end the game. That just completely goes out the window. So her threats are, or the threat she inherently presents is significantly lower. It's significantly lower. So I think that this will make a difference in a fair amount of games. I think this will change a lot of stuff because you just don't have to worry about certain things as much. That being said, you're still getting a solid body. We'll see. Overall thoughts on this patch. I am actually kind of upset with a lot of the anti-aggro changes. We, as mentioned multiple times, we were breaking everything down. We have a bunch of nerfs to aggro. We have a bunch of buffs to mid-range and control, and they're happening simultaneously. Concerning. So I could dislike the things that are happening, but recognize that they are good for the game. Is that the case here? I feel overall that this swung the pendulum too far towards control and mid-range. Could you make an argument, or could I make an argument, that aggro needed to be nerfed? Yes. Now, a nerf to aggro can come in the form of an actual nerf to aggro or a buff to the counters to it, whether that's champions, it's new cards, it's actual buffs to existing cards, combination thereof, whatever. I just think it went a little too far, and emphasis on the little. I don't think that this is, at least right now, this hot take section, I don't think this is an egregious, like, ridiculous overreach, because, well, right now I haven't tried any of the changes yet. I'm just looking at it on paper. So, it may end up being fine. So that's another thing to consider. Like, none of these changes, if we consider that aggro has shifted from the curve-based myth aggro decks that we had before. The curve-based myth aggro decks of yesterday have been replaced by the Fey aggro Veil Tracker builds today. That's worse, right? Worse from a frustration perspective, because you can't reasonably interact with Veil Tracker. There are ways to get rid of it. There are absolutely ways to interact with it and deal with it. They are fewer and farther between than the things that you could deal with a traditional curve-based aggro. Because while you could have, oh, well, my old 3-cost Sever the Source is a little clunky, but at least it now 1-for-1's the new Scarab. Again, if we didn't do all of the changes at the same time, we just did some. At least it hits that on curve and deals with it. But it could also go face, and it has these other benefits. Or I'm playing this other card, and then it can do this, or it can do this, and it's good in this matchup against Fey aggro, but it's a little worse against this other thing, and that's okay. Or vice versa. Now it's, you have to have something that somehow kills a Veil minion that's gotten buffed 15 times by the new Matron. Again, I haven't played yet. I haven't tried the new changes. I don't have stuff unlocked from the new season that much. At least at this point in time. I will, but not yet. So, overall, I can understand the logic behind these changes. I definitely see where the devs were coming from. I don't happen to agree with a lot of the changes. And here's the crazy part. If you made it this far, hopefully you did, because it's for YouTube, but if you made it this far, the crazy part is it's okay if I don't like the changes or I don't agree with them. That's fine. We'll live. The game is still here. Guess what? Things could change again. There will be new cards. There will be new nerfs. There will be new buffs. There will be new reworks. There'll be whatever. It's okay. And I think people need to recognize that, because even though I'm saying, oh man, all this stuff for aggro just got crapped on, and we only just got into the promised land for aggro, there's a ton of people out there who hate aggro, and now they're going to have a ball. Or maybe they won't, because maybe aggro is fine, and I'm misinterpreting the way the changes go, and it's just going to be okay. It's going to depend. We still have games to play. We still have to figure it out. Nobody this early in the season has solved it. There's still a lot of things to be done. And I'm looking forward to it. Whether I am super excited about the patch, the season, or not, or whatever, there's still more Runestrike to be played, and I am looking forward to that. So, that'll do it for this particular patch breakdown. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.